MillionaIre disguised himself as a homeless man to see the reaction of a poor girl he was in love with. David was a young man who seemingly had it all. Born into wealth and with a family name that commanded respect, he was accustomed to a life where most things came easily. Luxury cars, exotic vacations, and designer suits were his daily normal, and he rarely faced a moment when money wasn't the solution. But all of that couldn't fill the hollow feeling that had begun growing inside him. Lately, David realized he longed for something money couldn't buy: genuine, unfiltered connection. He wanted someone who would see him for who he truly was, not his wealth or status. One afternoon, as he stood gazing out the window of his sprawling estate, he noticed a young woman walking through the park nearby. She passed by nearly every day, moving with a sense of purpose that fascinated him. Unlike the people he was used to, who flaunted wealth or connections, this girl seemed different. She wore simple clothes, nothing flashy, and her hair was usually tied back in a loose ponytail, framing a face that reflected resilience and humility. She seemed ordinary, yet there was something about her that drew him in. Her name, he learned, was Rosa. She worked at a local shop in the neighborhood, and despite her modest appearance, she had a quiet confidence that made her stand out. As the days went by, David found himself looking forward to her presence in the park, observing her as she strolled along the tree-lined paths, sometimes carrying small grocery bags. The more he watched, the more intrigued he became. He saw something special in her, a light that seemed untouched by hardship, even if her weary face hinted at a difficult life. But David knew there was a barrier that separated them, one that couldn't be ignored. He was a millionaire, accustomed to the world's comforts, while Rosa seemed to live a life of constant struggle. If he approached her as he was, she might see him as just another privileged man, or worse, think he was looking down on her. He was determined to know the real Rosa, to see past her quiet smiles and modest clothes and find out what lay beneath. One evening, while talking with his closest friend, Matteo, David voiced his idea. "Matteo, I want to know her, really know her. But if I show up looking like this, she'll never see past my money." Matteo raised an eyebrow, half amused but also wary. "So what are you thinking, David? You're going to pretend to be someone else? Do you even know what you're getting into?" Matteo handed him an old, tattered coat. It smelled slightly musty and was a far cry from the finely tailored jackets David usually wore. "I've thought about it, and yes," David said, pulling on the coat and gazing at himself in the mirror. The effect was shocking. His usually neat, polished look was replaced by a rougher, unkempt appearance. His carefully combed hair was messy, his face shadowed with stubble. For a brief moment, he felt a rush of uncertainty. Was he really ready to take on this disguise, to step out of the world he knew? Matteo shook his head, a bit skeptical. "Listen, David, this could end in disaster. Pretending to be someone you're not, especially around someone you care about, it's risky." David nodded. He understood the risks, but something about Rosa made him feel that this was worth it. "If I don't do this, I'll always wonder who she really is," he said quietly. "I need to know that if she ever cares about me, it's for who I am, not what I have." The next morning, dressed in his disguise, David made his way to the park, positioning himself along Rosa's usual route. His heart pounded with anticipation, his mind racing with what-ifs. What if she simply ignored him? What if she recognized him, despite his disguise? He took a deep breath and steadied himself, forcing his hands to tremble slightly, adding to the illusion of vulnerability. At last, he saw her in the distance, her expression focused but weary, carrying a small bag, likely with groceries or simple essentials. As she walked closer, David took a deep breath, stepping into his role. He reached out a trembling hand, his voice low and unsteady. "Please, miss, could you spare some food? I haven't eaten all day." Rosa stopped, clearly surprised, her eyes widening slightly as she took him in. David noticed the way her gaze softened, as though she were seeing not just his shabby appearance but something deeper. "I don't have much," she murmured, her voice gentle. "But here, you can have this." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small loaf of bread, placing it in his hand with a shy but kind smile. David's heart swelled with gratitude and admiration. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you so much. You don't know how much this means." He wanted to say more, to somehow let her know how much her kindness touched him, but he held back, reminding himself of his purpose. Rosa gave a small nod, her own face warming with a faint smile before she continued on her way. David watched her leave, feeling a strange mix of joy and sadness. He knew she had given him part of her own meal, and he couldn't help but be moved by the quiet generosity she showed. Feeling a new resolve, David decided he would return to the park each day, hoping to find more opportunities to speak with Rosa. He wanted to learn about her life, to understand her challenges, and to see the world through her eyes. There was something about her that made him feel more alive, as if he were finally seeing life in full color. Little did he know that his journey of discovery was only beginning, and that his decision to step out of his own world would reveal not just the secrets of Rosa's life, but also the hidden depths of his own heart. David knew he had to be cautious. He wanted to gain Rosa's trust, to let her feel safe enough to confide in him on her own terms. But he also knew that pushing too hard could risk everything. One wrong move, one hint that he knew more than he should, and Rosa might turn away from him for good, and he couldn't let that happen. He had come too far, and his feelings for her had grown too deep. The stakes were high, and he could feel the weight of them with every step he took. The next time he saw her approaching from a distance, his heart skipped a beat. She walked with that familiar weary look, but today there was something different, a shadow of worry across her face, a strain that seemed to press down on her shoulders. David could sense something weighing heavily on her heart. He took a steadying breath and decided it was time to make his move. As she neared, he got up from the bench and approached her, keeping his voice calm, but his heart pounded with nerves. "Rosa," he called gently. She stopped, surprised to see him waiting for her so early. "Of course, David. Is everything all right? You seem concerned." David hesitated, carefully choosing his words. "I've just been thinking. I worry about you and your mother. I want to help, but I feel like there's more going on than you've shared with me. Is there something you're not telling me?" Rosa's gaze shifted, and for a moment David feared he'd said too much. But she sighed and looked down, her shoulders sagging with the weight of whatever she was carrying. "David," she began, her voice soft but troubled. "It's not that I don't trust you. It's just there are things in my life that are hard to talk about. Things I don't want anyone to worry about." David's heart tightened. He could feel her reluctance, her need to shield him from her struggles, but he also knew he couldn't back down now. "Rosa," he said gently, "I just want to be there for you. Whatever it is, I want to help. You don't have to face this alone." Rosa looked at him, and he saw the conflict in her eyes, a mix of hope and fear. Finally, she nodded slowly. "All right, David. Tonight, after my mother goes to sleep, I'll tell you everything. But promise me you won't judge. And please, don't tell anyone else." "I promise," David replied, reaching out and briefly taking her hand. The touch was fleeting, but it filled him with warmth, and for a moment, he felt closer to her than ever before. That evening, David arrived at Rosa's house feeling a strange combination of anticipation and anxiety. He knew he was on the brink of learning the truth, but he wasn't sure he was ready for what he might hear. Rosa welcomed him with a small, grateful smile, her eyes soft but tired. They shared a quiet meal, her mother drifting off to sleep shortly after, and then Rosa led him to the small living room where they sat across from each other, face to face. Rosa took a deep, shuddering breath before she began to speak. "David, this isn't easy for me to talk about," she said, her voice wavering. "But there are things I've had to do, things you wouldn't expect, just to make sure my mother and I survive." David leaned in, his heart pounding as he listened to her, each word hitting him like a stone. "I'm here to listen, Rosa. Whatever you have to say, I'll understand." She nodded and glanced down, her fingers twisting nervously in her lap. "My mother has a serious illness. she explained. Her medication is expensive, and her treatments they're just more than I can afford with my job at the store. So I've had to take on other work that isn't exactly respectable. She looked down, her cheeks flushing with a mix of shame and sadness. David swallowed hard, but his voice was steady. What kind of work? He asked gently. Rosa hesitated, looking away. Some nights, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. I work as an escort for men who come out of the taverns. It's dangerous, and it's not something I'm proud of, but I don't have another choice. I need the money for my mother's medicine. David felt as if the ground beneath him was slipping away. His mind spun with a whirlwind of emotions, shock, sadness, anger, and a deep, painful empathy. He had never imagined Rosa was involved in something so dangerous, but he understood her desperation. His heart broke as he saw the shame in her eyes, a shame she didn't deserve to carry. Rosa, he began, his voice thick with emotion. I can't imagine how difficult this must be for you. But this isn't safe. What would happen if something went wrong? If someone took advantage of you? I can't bear the thought of you being hurt. Rosa looked up, her eyes brimming with tears. I know, David, she whispered. I know the risks. But no one would help me if they knew the truth, and I can't let my mother suffer. She has no one else. David felt a surge of helplessness, mixed with a fierce determination. He wanted to take her pain away, to shield her from this world, but he knew he couldn't do it without her trust. Rosa, he said softly, please let me help you. You don't have to keep doing this. I have resources. There are safer ways to get what you need. Rosa looked at him, her face a mix of surprise and suspicion. Resources? What are you talking about, David? You're a kind man, but I don't see how you could possibly help with something like this. David hesitated, feeling the weight of his secret press down on him. He knew he was at a crossroads. If he wanted Rosa to truly trust him, he had to come clean. Rosa, he said, his voice barely a whisper. There's something you need to know about me. Something that could change everything. She frowned, clearly puzzled. What do you mean? David took a deep breath, bracing himself. I'm not who you think I am, Rosa. My real name is David Hartwell, and I'm not actually homeless. I'm a millionaire. He paused, watching her expression shift from confusion to shock. I disguised myself because I wanted to find someone who could see beyond my wealth, who could care about me for who I am, not what I have. And when I saw you, I knew you were that person. For a long, painful moment, Rosa remained silent. Her face went through a range of emotions, surprise, disbelief, and finally anger. So you've been lying to me? You've been pretending this whole time just to test me? Her voice trembled with hurt. How could you do this, David? I trusted you. David felt his world collapsing. Rosa, please let me explain. I never wanted to hurt you. I just wanted to know you for who you really are. And what I feel for you, it's real. I want to help you, to be with you. But I couldn't do that without being honest with you first. Rosa stood up, her face flushed with anger and betrayal. You can't just show up here and think you can fix everything with your money, David. You don't understand what my life is like, and I don't want your pity or your help. Just leave. David reached out, desperate to make her understand, but she stepped back, tears streaming down her face. Rosa, please. I don't want to lose you. I know I made a mistake, but I did it because I love you. She looked at him, her expression hardened by pain. If you really loved me, you wouldn't have deceived me like this. Now go. And don't come back. David felt his heart shatter as he watched her walk away, the door closing firmly behind her. He stood there in the dark, his soul aching with regret and loss. But as he turned to leave, a fierce determination began to burn within him. He couldn't let things end this way. He had to find a way to show her that his love was genuine. As he walked back to his car, David's mind raced with ideas. By the time he reached his house, he had a plan forming, a plan to prove to Rosa that he was willing to fight for her, no matter the cost. The next morning, just as the sun was rising, David woke up, more determined than ever. He was ready to do whatever it took to earn Rosa's forgiveness, to show her that his love was real, and he wouldn't give up until he had done just that. The events of the previous night haunted David relentlessly, each moment replaying in his mind like a loop he couldn't break free from. His heart was heavy, and as he paced his luxurious living room, he knew he couldn't let things end this way. The hurt in Rosa's eyes haunted him, and he felt the sting of regret deeper than he'd ever felt before. David spent the morning racking his brain, desperately searching for a way to see Rosa again without her rejecting him on sight. After hours of thinking, an idea struck him. Over the years, David had mastered the art of negotiation and persuasion. He had closed deals and rebuilt partnerships others thought impossible. But this time was different. This wasn't about money or business. This was a fight for love, and it was the hardest thing he'd ever faced. That's when he remembered Mrs. Estella, Rosa's elderly neighbor. Estella had practically raised Rosa and had always been a mother figure to her. If he could convince Estella of his sincerity, maybe she could help him bridge the gap. His heart hammered at the thought, but he knew it was worth a try. Grabbing his coat, David left his house and drove straight to the modest neighborhood where Rosa lived. As he arrived, the quiet street was bathed in the soft light of morning, and the chirping of birds was the only sound that filled the stillness. David stood in front of Estella's small, cozy home, feeling a rush of nerves. He hesitated, his hand raised to knock, but he took a deep breath and tapped on the door. A moment later, Estella opened it, and her expression quickly turned to one of surprise, and a hint of suspicion. "David? What are you doing here so early?" Her eyes were sharp, and she crossed her arms, waiting for his answer. David felt small under her scrutinizing gaze, but he knew he had to be honest. "Mrs. Estella, I know I'm probably the last person you want to see," he admitted, his voice thick with remorse. "But I need to talk to you. It's about Rosa. I made a mistake, a huge mistake, and I need your help to make things right. Please, would you hear me out?" Estella looked at him, silent and thoughtful. She studied his face, searching for signs of sincerity. After a long pause, she finally nodded and stepped aside. "Come in, David. I'll listen, but I can't promise you anything." David stepped inside the humble living room, which was filled with warmth and personal touches, family photos, knickknacks, and small reminders of a simple, loving life. He sat on the worn sofa, his gaze fixed on his hands as he tried to gather his thoughts. Across from him, Estella settled into her armchair, her gaze steady as she waited for him to speak. "What I did was wrong," David began, his voice barely above a whisper. "I lied to Rosa, and I regret it deeply. I never wanted to hurt her, and I didn't realize how much my deception would affect her. But my feelings for her, they're real. I want to make things right, to show her that she can trust me. But I can't do it alone, and I thought maybe you could help." Estella's expression softened slightly, though her eyes remained guarded. "David, Rosa has been through more in her life than you can imagine. She's worked so hard, and she doesn't let people in easily. You not only lied to her, but you made her believe in something that wasn't real. That hurt her deeply." David nodded, his face filled with regret. "I know, Mrs. Estella, and I'm so sorry. I would do anything to go back and change it, but all I can do now is try to make amends. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to show Rosa that my love for her is real." Estella sighed, her expression a mixture of empathy and skepticism. "I can see you're genuinely sorry, David, but Rosa is stubborn. When she makes up her mind about something, it's not easy to change it. I can't promise anything, but I'll talk to her. She deserves to hear your side, even if it doesn't change her feelings." A spark of hope flickered in David's heart. "Thank you, Mrs. Estella," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. "I know she may not forgive me, but if I can just have a chance to speak to her, to explain why I did what I did, maybe I can make things right. I know I've let her down, but I'm not giving up. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to prove myself to her. Estella sighed and nodded, a slight smile appearing on her face. I'll do what I can, David. But remember, this won't be easy, and it might already be too late. David thanked her sincerely, feeling as if he'd taken the first small step toward redemption. As he left, he felt a newfound resolve settling in his chest. It would be a long road, but he wasn't afraid of hard work, not when it came to Rosa. That evening, Estella went to visit Rosa. She found her sitting alone in the dimly lit living room, her eyes red and swollen from hours of crying. Rosa was staring at the television, but it was clear she wasn't truly watching. Her thoughts were far away, lost in the heartache that David's betrayal had caused. Rosa, Estella said gently, sitting down beside her. We need to talk. Rosa looked at Estella, trying to smile, but the sadness in her eyes was unmistakable. What is it, Mrs. Estella? I don't really feel like talking right now. Estella took her hand, giving it a comforting squeeze. I know, dear. But I think you need to hear this. David came to see me this morning. He looked devastated by everything that happened. He asked me to speak to you because he doesn't want to lose you. He wants a chance to explain himself, Rosa. Rosa's face fell, and she looked away, her heart conflicted. I don't know if I can trust him, Estella. I feel so foolish for believing in him, in everything he told me. I thought he was someone I could trust, but it was all a lie. Estella sighed, her voice gentle but firm. I understand how you feel, Rosa. But sometimes, when we're hurt, we let pride and anger cloud our judgment. I'm not saying you should forgive him right away, but maybe, just give him the chance to explain himself. Listen to his side. If he's willing to make amends, it might be worth hearing him out. Rosa remained silent, her thoughts racing as she weighed Estella's words. Finally, after a few long minutes, she nodded reluctantly. All right, she said quietly. I'll listen to him. But only because you asked me to. I don't know if it will change anything, but I'll give him the chance to speak. Estella smiled, relief evident in her eyes. That's my girl. I'm proud of you for being brave enough to face this. Remember, you don't have to decide anything right away. Just listen to him and see where your heart leads you. As Estella held her hand, Rosa felt a glimmer of hope she hadn't expected. She wasn't ready to forgive, but maybe, just maybe, she was willing to listen. The previous night's memories played over and over in David's mind like a painful, unending loop. Every word, every hurt expression on Rosa's face, haunted him. As the sun rose, casting a soft light across his room, David lay wide awake, thinking of ways to reconnect with her, to help her see the sincerity behind his actions. But how could he approach her without being pushed away? Eventually, he drew on his years of experience in business, where he had faced complex challenges and learned how to navigate even the toughest negotiations. But this was different. He wasn't fighting for a contract or trying to salvage a deal. He was fighting for love. He needed to find a way to bridge the distance he had created. As he pondered, a memory surfaced. Rosa's neighbor, Mrs. Estella, had always been like a second mother to her. If anyone could help, it would be Estella. She was wise and compassionate, and her opinion meant the world to Rosa. Maybe, just maybe, if he could convince Estella of his sincerity, she could help him reach Rosa. His heart pounded with both hope and anxiety as he left his home and drove to the modest neighborhood where Rosa lived. The streets were quiet in the early morning light, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves as he parked and approached Estella's house. Taking a deep breath, he knocked, hearing the sound echo in the stillness. The door opened slowly, and Estella stood there, her face marked with surprise and a hint of suspicion. David? What are you doing here so early? She asked, crossing her arms, her sharp gaze fixed on him. David swallowed, feeling the weight of her scrutiny. Mrs. Estella, I know I'm probably the last person you expected to see today. But I need to talk to you about Rosa. I made a mistake, and I'm deeply sorry for the pain I've caused her. I came here to ask for your help because I know how much she respects you. Please hear me out. Estella's expression softened just slightly, but her gaze remained wary. After a long pause, she finally stepped aside. "Come in, David. I'll listen, but I can't promise you anything." Inside, the warmth of Estella's home surrounded him, framed photos, mementos, and small details that filled the space with love and memories. David sat on the worn sofa, nervously twisting his hands, while Estella settled across from him, her expression unreadable as she waited for him to speak. "Mrs. Estella," he began, struggling to find the right words. "What I did to Rosa was terrible. I deceived her, and I regret it more than I can express. But my feelings for her, they're real. She's the first person who's ever seen me as more than my wealth, and I would give anything to make things right with her. I know I've lost her trust, but if there's even the smallest chance that I could prove myself, I would do whatever it takes." Estella studied him for a moment, her gaze softening. "David, Rosa has had a difficult life. She's had to work hard for everything and protect herself from people who don't always have the best intentions. What you did, it hurt her deeply. But I can see that you're genuinely sorry." David nodded, his face filled with regret. "Thank you, Mrs. Estella. I know I've let her down, and I don't expect her to forgive me easily. But I came here because I needed you to know that I love her. I'm willing to put in the time and effort to show her that I'm serious about this, about us." Estella sighed, nodding slowly. "I'll talk to her, David. I'll tell her what you've said. But remember, Rosa is stubborn, and she doesn't change her mind easily. This may already be too late." Gratitude filled David's heart, and he thanked her sincerely. "Thank you, Mrs. Estella. That's all I can ask for." As he left, he felt a glimmer of hope, even though he knew the journey to winning Rosa back would be long and challenging. Later that evening, Estella visited Rosa, finding her sitting alone on the couch, her eyes red from hours of crying. The television was on, but Rosa wasn't really watching. Her mind was somewhere far away, lost in her heartache. "Rosa," Estella said gently, sitting down beside her, "there's something we need to talk about." Rosa looked over, trying to smile but clearly struggling. "I don't really feel like talking, Estella." Estella took her hand, giving it a comforting squeeze. "I know, dear, but sometimes the things we don't want to talk about are the ones we need to face the most. David came to see me today." At the mention of his name, Rosa's face fell, and she looked away, pain and anger flaring in her eyes. "I don't want to hear about him, Estella. He lied to me, made me feel like a fool. I trusted him." Estella sighed, her voice soft but firm. "I understand why you feel that way, Rosa. But he came to me because he's truly sorry, and he doesn't want to lose you. He's asking for a chance to explain himself." Rosa shook her head, hurt and disbelief mixed in her expression. "How can I believe anything he says now? It all feels like one big game to him." "I know it feels that way," Estella replied. "But sometimes, when we're hurting, we let pride get in the way of understanding. I'm not saying you should forgive him right away, Rosa. But maybe, just maybe, you could give him the chance to speak. Just listen to what he has to say." Rosa fell silent, wrestling with a whirlwind of emotions. Part of her wanted to shut him out forever, but another part of her, however small, wanted to understand why he had done what he did. Finally, she nodded, though reluctance was evident in her eyes. "All right, I'll listen to him. But only because you asked me to." Estella smiled, her heart filling with relief. "That's all I'm asking, dear. You don't have to decide anything right now. Just give him the chance to explain." The following day, Rosa agreed to meet David at a small cafe near her neighborhood. When she arrived, she saw him sitting alone in a corner booth, looking far different from the confident man she once knew. His face was drawn, with dark circles under his eyes, a sign of many sleepless nights. As soon as he saw her, David stood up, his heart racing with a mixture of relief and nervousness. "Thank you for coming, Rosa," he said quietly, gratitude clear in his voice. "I know this isn't easy for you, and I can't tell you how much it means to me that you've given me this chance." Rosa nodded, her expression guarded as she sat across from him, avoiding his gaze. "Tell me why, David. Why did you do this?" David took a deep breath, steadying himself. "Rosa, when I met you, I was lost. I had everything money could buy, but I was lonely. I was tired of people who only saw me for my wealth, who never really cared about who I was inside. So, I decided to disguise myself as someone without money, hoping I could find someone who would see beyond appearances." Rosa's eyes flickered with a hint of curiosity, but her face remained cold. "And why me? Why did you think I was that person?" David swallowed, his heart pounding as he spoke. "Because from the very first moment I saw you, I felt something different. You had no reason to help me, yet you did. You treated me with kindness, with dignity. You saw me, and not what I had or didn't have. And as we got closer, I realized I was falling for you. It wasn't part of my plan, but it happened. And when I realized how much you meant to me, I didn't know how to tell you the truth. I was afraid that telling you would ruin everything." Rosa listened, her expression softening slightly, though pain lingered in her eyes. "So what now, David? Do you think I should just forgive you and pretend none of this happened?" David shook his head. "No, Rosa. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, or that things will go back to how they were. But I do hope you can understand why I did it. I love you, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to prove that my feelings are real. I just want a chance to show you that I'm worthy of your trust." Rosa was quiet for a long time, her emotions churning as she absorbed his words. She could feel the sincerity in his voice, but the hurt was still fresh. She knew it would take time to rebuild the trust he had broken, but a part of her felt that perhaps all wasn't lost. "I need time to think, David," she said, finally standing up. I don't know what's going to happen. Rosa's words echoed in David's mind as he watched her walk away from the cafe, leaving him with a mix of hope and uncertainty. He knew she needed time to heal, to decide if she could ever trust him again, and he was willing to wait as long as it took. Over the following weeks, David continued to quietly support her neighborhood, helping with community repairs, donating anonymously, and even establishing a fund for low-income families with medical needs. It wasn't about winning Rosa back, it was about showing her that he understood her world, that he wanted to make a difference in it, with or without her love. Rosa couldn't help but notice the changes. The town spoke of the mysterious donations that had improved the lives of many, and every time she saw the impact, she thought of David. The anger she once felt had softened into something she couldn't quite define, gratitude, perhaps, or maybe even admiration. One chilly afternoon, as Rosa was walking home from work, she saw David standing outside her small house. He looked nervous, holding a letter in his hand. She paused, feeling her heart race, then walked toward him. "Rosa," he said, his voice steady but his eyes full of emotion. "I wrote you this letter because there are things I still need to say, things I need you to know. But I'll leave it up to you to read it or not. I just want you to have it." He handed her the envelope, and with a final, hopeful look, he turned and walked away. Rosa stood there for a long moment, then went inside, her fingers trembling as she opened the letter. It read, underscore 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 underscore. Dear Rosa, from the day I met you, you changed my life. You made me see the world with new eyes, beyond wealth and comfort, beyond my narrow, privileged view of the world. You made me realize that love is more than just feelings, it's sacrifice, trust, and honesty. I failed you by hiding the truth, but I want you to know that my love has always been real. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I do hope that someday you'll understand why I did what I did. If you ever decide to give me a second chance, know that I will be here, waiting. Until then, I'll continue to work to make this world a better place, the way you taught me. Thank you for everything, Rosa. Thank you for changing me. With all my heart. David. Rosa sat there, her heart pounding as she read each word. The pain of his deception lingered, but there was something deeper, an understanding that perhaps, despite his mistakes, David had truly loved her and had changed because of her. Tears welled up in her eyes as she realized that, against all odds, she still cared for him. Days passed, and Rosa found herself thinking about David constantly. She missed their conversations, the way he made her laugh, the way he had always seemed to truly see her. Finally, after much soul-searching, she knew what she had to do. On a quiet, rainy evening, she found herself at David's door. Heart pounding, she knocked softly, and a moment later, David opened the door. His face lit up with a mix of surprise and hope as he saw her standing there, soaked from the rain. "Rosa," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "What are you doing here?" She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I read your letter, David. And I realized. I've missed you. I can't promise that everything will be perfect, but I'm willing to try if you are." David's eyes filled with tears as he nodded, a radiant smile spreading across his face. "Rosa, I would do anything. I just want a chance to be the man you deserve." They stood in the doorway, the rain softly falling around them, and for the first time in a long time, Rosa felt a sense of peace. They shared a quiet, heartfelt embrace, knowing that the road ahead would be challenging, but also knowing that they would face it together. From that day on, David and Rosa began to rebuild their relationship, one step at a time. David continued to work in her community, dedicating himself to projects that helped families like Rosa's, and slowly, Rosa's trust in him grew once again. They spent more time together, talking openly about their dreams, fears, and everything they had kept hidden before. Months later, under the golden light of a sunset, David asked Rosa to marry him, not as a wealthy man trying to win her heart, but as a man who had been forever changed by her love and strength. With tears of joy in her eyes, Rosa said yes, knowing that together, they could face anything life threw their way. Their love story became something of a legend in the small town, inspiring others to believe in second chances, forgiveness, and the power of love to overcome even the deepest wounds. And as they stood hand in hand, watching the sun dip below the horizon, they knew they had found the genuine, lasting connection they had both been searching for all along.